I had always been drawn to the idea of solo camping. The peace, the solitude, the chance to connect with nature, all of it called to me like a siren song. So, one warm evening in late August, I loaded up my trusty truck with gear, packed my beagle Reggie, and set out for Maplewood Forest, a local woodland I had heard so much about. It was a place where tall pines swayed gently in the breeze, and streams trickled over smooth stones, offering a serene escape from my hectic life. As I drove deeper into the woods, the towering trees closed in around me, and the sounds of the world faded away. Reggie, my enthusiastic sidekick, was perched in the passenger seat, ears flopping as he peered out the window, taking in the sights. I could feel the excitement bubbling within me. This was the adventure I had been craving. Arriving at the campsite, I quickly set to work unloading my gear. The campsite was well marked, and the fire pit had already been cleared of debris. I pitched my tent beside a small creek, the sound of water soothing my nerves as I went about my tasks. Reggie, ever the curious pup, explored the area, sniffing every rock and tree he could find. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I set up a small fire, its crackling flames illuminating the darkening woods. I roasted some hot dogs, sharing bites with Reggie, who sat at my feet, eyes wide with anticipation. I couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. We were finally here, just the two of us, ready to embrace whatever the woods had to offer. But as darkness enveloped the forest, a chill crept into the air. I dismissed it, attributing it to the temperature drop, but something about the silence unsettled me. The usual sounds of the woods, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, seemed muted, as if the forest was holding its breath. I tried to shake off the feeling. After all, this was a familiar place for many, and I was prepared. I had my flashlight, a first aid kit, and my trusty pocket knife. Everything I needed for a peaceful camping trip. Yet, as I settled into my sleeping bag that night, with Reggie curled up beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of Reggie growling softly. His body tensed, and he stared intently at the entrance of the tent. I sat up, my heart racing, and strained to hear what had disturbed him. At first, I heard nothing, just the rustling of leaves in the wind. But then, faintly, I caught the sound of footsteps crunching on twigs. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "Reggie, hush!" I whispered, hoping my voice would soothe him. But the growl intensified, deep and low, as if he were trying to warn me of a danger lurking just outside our thin canvas barrier. I reached for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the tent's interior. As I sat there, pulse racing, I heard a distant whispering, too quiet to make out the words but eerie enough to send chills racing down my spine. I strained to hear, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. But there it was again, a murmur carried by the wind, seeming to come from deeper within the woods. I decided to investigate, thinking it might be another camper or some wildlife. But as I unzipped the tent flap, Reggie's growling escalated into frantic barks. I peered outside, shining the flashlight into the inky blackness. The beam revealed nothing, only the trees standing tall like sentinels, and shadows dancing ominously in the firelight. I stepped outside, feeling a surge of adrenaline. The air was heavy, thick with tension, and the only sounds were the faint crackling of the fire, and Reggie's incessant barking. "Stay close, boy," I murmured, feeling a strange compulsion to calm my faithful companion. But as I scanned the area, my sense of unease deepened. The forest felt different, almost alive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After a few minutes of tense silence, I turned back to the campsite, feeling ridiculous for allowing myself to get spooked. Just as I was about to step back into the tent, I heard a rustling sound coming from the direction of my gear. My heart raced. Someone was there. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, but it was too late. The noise faded into the darkness. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. No response. Only the chilling whisper of the wind through the trees. I grabbed my phone, but the signal was weak, typical for these remote areas. Just as I was about to retreat back into the tent, a shadow darted between the trees. Panic surged through me as Reggie's barking escalated. I decided then to move my campsite. Whatever, or whoever, was out there was not going to get the best of me. With quick, shaky hands I packed my things, Reggie pacing anxiously at my feet. It took longer than I would have liked, my mind racing with all the horror stories I'd heard about the woods. Stories of campers going missing, of strange creatures lurking just beyond the trees. Once I had everything packed, I found another spot further from the creek, closer to the road but still hidden enough to feel somewhat isolated. I set up my tent again, this time with my back against the trunk of a sturdy oak tree, a sense of safety in the bark's embrace. But as I crawled back into my sleeping bag, the atmosphere remained tense. I could still hear the whispering in the distance, echoing in my mind, blending with the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, as if the woods were holding on to a secret, and I was not meant to know. Finally, I drifted off to a fitful sleep, the uneasy sounds of the woods continuing to haunt my dreams. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a terrifying ordeal that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about the forest, and about myself. I woke up to the sound of Reggie whining softly. His fur bristled and his ears perked up. The first rays of dawn barely pierced through the thick canopy of leaves above us, casting a dim light over the campsite. I reached down to give him a reassuring pat, but I could feel my heart still racing from the night's events. "Easy, boy," I whispered, trying to shake off the residual fear that clung to me like a second skin. I unzipped the tent and crawled out, stretching my arms above my head. The fresh morning air felt cool against my skin, and for a moment, I let the tranquility of nature wash over me. As I made my way to the creek, I tried to push aside the memory of the previous night. Maybe I had just been imagining things, allowing my imagination to run wild in the dark. After all, it was easy to feel anxious when alone in the woods, especially after hearing those unsettling sounds. Reggie splashed through the water, barking happily as he chased after the rippling reflections of the trees. I couldn't help but smile. Watching him play brought me comfort. I filled my water bottle, grateful for the natural source so close by, and began preparing breakfast. But as I cooked my oatmeal, my mind kept drifting back to the events of the night before. The footsteps, the whispers, and that shadow darting between the trees, it all felt too real to ignore. I glanced around the clearing, half expecting to see someone watching me from the underbrush. The forest felt different during the day, yet a sense of paranoia lingered just beneath the surface. After breakfast, I decided to take Reggie for a short hike, hoping that a change of scenery would clear my mind. We wandered along a narrow trail, the sun filtering through the leaves in a dance of light and shadow. I breathed in the earthy scent of moss and wet leaves, trying to ground myself in the moment. But the deeper we went into the woods, the more the uneasy feeling returned. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being followed. Whenever I stopped to take in the scenery, I felt eyes on me. The rustling leaves and the snapping of twigs made my heart race. I glanced back frequently, expecting to see someone or something lurking just out of sight. After about an hour, I stopped at a clearing to catch my breath. The sun was high now, but the woods felt oddly quiet. The birds had stopped singing, and the rustling of animals seemed to have faded into nothingness. Reggie, normally so full of energy, stood beside me, panting but alert, his ears twitching in every direction. "Something's not right, buddy," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Let's head back." As we turned around, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I walked faster, my pace quickening with each passing minute. When we returned to the campsite, I decided to take a few moments to collect my thoughts. Maybe I could salvage this trip after all. I rummaged through my gear, searching for my journal to jot down my experiences. As I flipped through the pages, I heard it again, the faint whispering from the night before. This time, it was closer, clearer. I could almost make out words, but they slipped away before I could grasp them. Panic welled up within me. I hurriedly tucked the journal away, my heart racing as I glanced around the campsite, feeling trapped within the confines of the trees. "Reggie, come on," I said, my voice shaky. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but the whispering grew louder, punctuated by distant laughter that echoed through the trees. It was a sound that sent chills down my spine, a jarring contrast to the peaceful setting. I grabbed the flashlight, not wanting to feel completely defenseless, and made my way to the edge of the clearing. My heart pounded as I scanned the area, searching for any sign of life. I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a flash of white disappearing behind a tree. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound confident. The only response was the soft rustle of leaves, and for a moment, I considered retreating back into the tent. But something compelled me to stay. I stepped closer to the tree where I'd seen the movement, Reggie close at my side, barking nervously. I peered behind the trunk, but there was nothing there, just a tangle of underbrush and the endless expanse of trees. I turned back to the campsite, a knot forming in my stomach. As the day wore on, I tried to distract myself by going for another hike, but the paranoia only deepened. Each crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sent me into a frenzy. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to jump out at me. Finally, I decided to head back to camp, hoping to find comfort in familiarity. But as I reached the clearing, a sickening feeling washed over me. The tent was unzipped. My stomach dropped. I raced forward, Reggie barking furiously beside me. "Who's been in here?" I shouted, scanning the area for any signs of disturbance. My gear lay scattered, as if someone had rifled through my belongings. Panic surged through me as I realized how vulnerable I had been, alone in this vast forest. I gathered my things, heart racing, feeling a mix of fear and anger. What had they taken? I hurriedly checked my supplies, my food, my gear. Everything seemed to be intact, but the sense of violation gnawed at me. Whoever had been here had invaded my personal space, leaving behind a trail of anxiety. Just as I was about to pack up and leave, I heard it again, the distant laughter. This time, it was clearer, taunting. I could feel my breath quicken, and I wanted nothing more than to escape this place. I grabbed Reggie, shoving my belongings into my backpack with frantic urgency. "Let's go, Reggie! We're leaving!" I exclaimed, fear gripping my heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. As I turned to leave, a flash of movement caught my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, shrouded in shadows. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure seemed to blend into the trees, but I could feel its eyes on me, a coldness creeping into my bones. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. Just then, Reggie broke free, barking furiously as he charged toward the figure. "Reggie, no!" I yelled, panic surging as I chased after him. But before I could reach him, the figure disappeared into the woods, as if it had never been there at all. I called out to Reggie, my voice trembling as I tried to keep the fear at bay. "Come back! Come back!" But he was too caught up in the chase, darting after the figure into the thick underbrush. I rushed after him, heart racing, desperately trying to keep him in my sight. But the woods were disorienting. Each turn I took led me deeper into the shadows, and I lost track of my surroundings. The whispering grew louder, echoing all around me, and I felt the weight of eyes pressing down on me. The laughter was all-consuming, reverberating through the trees. "Reggie!" I shouted, but my voice sounded small and insignificant amidst the chaos. I stumbled through the underbrush, branches scratching at my arms, panic clawing at my chest. Just as I thought I would lose my mind, I caught a glimpse of Reggie, standing at the base of a large oak tree. He was barking up at something, for standing on end. I rushed to him, relieved to find him safe but filled with dread as I followed his gaze. What I saw made my blood run cold. At the base of the tree was a small, tattered doll, its glass eyes staring blankly into the abyss. It was grotesque, dirt caked on its porcelain skin, and its clothes were ripped and torn. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I stepped back instinctively. "What the hell?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. I glanced around, feeling the darkness closing in on me, the laughter echoing in the distance. I knew then that I had to get out of the woods, now. I grabbed Reggie's collar and turned to retrace my steps, but as I turned, I caught sight of the figure again, lurking between the trees. It was closer this time, its face obscured by shadows. I turned to run, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I sprinted back toward the campsite, Reggie following closely at my heels. The laughter followed us, a haunting melody that chased us through the trees. Just as I reached the clearing, I heard the figure moving behind me, the branches snapping underfoot. I could feel the panic swelling within me, the urge to escape this nightmare driving me forward. I reached my truck, fumbling with the keys as I tried to steady my shaking hands. "Get in, Reggie!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. He jumped into the passenger seat as I scrambled behind the wheel, slamming the door shut with a force that echoed in the stillness of the woods. I could still hear the laughter, the whispers. It was all around me, suffocating. I started the engine, my heart racing as I looked back at the woods, the shadows shifting and dancing among the trees. I slammed the truck into gear and tore down the gravel road, desperate to leave the horrors of the forest behind. But even as I drove, I could feel the eyes on me, the weight of unseen watchers pressing down on my shoulders. Days turned into weeks after that harrowing experience, but the memories of that camping trip continued to haunt me. The whispers, the laughter, and that shadowy figure, they lingered in my mind like a ghost, taunting me whenever I closed my eyes. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was just an overactive imagination fueled by fear and isolation. But deep down, I knew there was something sinister about Maplewood Forest. Reggie, once my enthusiastic companion, had become a constant reminder of that night. His demeanor changed. He seemed anxious and alert, barking at shadows and distant sounds as if he, too, could sense the lingering danger. I avoided the woods, choosing instead to stay in the comfort of my home, but the memories were inescapable. One day, as I sat on my porch, I saw a group of hikers heading toward Maplewood. They laughed and joked, carefree in a way I could hardly comprehend. My heart raced as I remembered the feeling of being watched, the laughter echoing in the trees. I wanted to shout out a warning, to tell them to stay away, but I remained silent, paralyzed by my memories. It was a Saturday afternoon when the phone rang, breaking me from my thoughts. The voice on the other end was frantic, a local ranger who had heard about my experience. "We need to talk," he said, his voice urgent. "There have been reports of strange occurrences in Maplewood Forest, and we think it's connected to what happened to you." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There have been several campers going missing in the area, and others have reported similar experiences, whispers, laughter, sightings of figures. We believe it may be more than just a coincidence." I could hardly process what I was hearing. "What do you want from me?" "We need your help. If you're willing, we'd like you to come back to the forest with us. We think you might be able to identify anything unusual." I hesitated, the fear gripping me tightly. I hadn't returned to that place since the incident. I didn't want to face those memories again. But as I listened to the ranger's voice, I felt a strange pull. Perhaps this was my chance to confront the fear, to reclaim the experience that had haunted me for so long. After a long pause, I finally nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." A few days later, I found myself back at Maplewood Forest, the sunlight filtering through the trees in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. I was with the ranger and a couple of other volunteers, each equipped with flashlights and walkie-talkies. Reggie was by my side, his demeanor tense but alert. As we walked deeper into the woods, I could feel the atmosphere shift. The laughter was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate the air around us. I glanced around, half expecting to see that shadow lurking just out of sight. The ranger led us to the spot where I had camped, the memories flooding back as I stood in the clearing. The remains of my fire pit were still there, the charred wood a stark reminder of the fear that had taken root within me. "We've found evidence of unusual activity in this area," the ranger explained, his voice steady. "People have reported feeling watched, hearing whispers. We suspect there might be something more sinister at play." Just as he spoke, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was as if the forest itself was listening, holding its breath in anticipation. I turned to Reggie, who was sniffing the ground, his body tense. "Is something here?" I whispered, half to myself and half to the others. Suddenly, we heard it, a distant laughter that echoed through the trees, a sound that felt both mocking and sinister. My heart raced, and I glanced at the others, their expressions mirroring my fear. "Did you hear that?" one of the volunteers asked, his voice shaky. Before we could respond, Reggie began barking frantically, his body tense as he stared into the depths of the woods. I could feel the panic rising within me as I scanned the area, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stay close," the ranger instructed, but I could sense the unease in his voice. The laughter grew louder, swirling around us, taunting us with its eerie melody. "We need to move," the ranger urged, and we started to back away, retracing our steps toward the path. But as we did, I felt a sudden compulsion to turn back, to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. "Wait!" I shouted, but the others had already begun to retreat. "We need to find out what's happening." Without thinking, I dashed deeper into the woods, Reggie close behind me. The laughter intensified, and I could hear the whispering again, words slipping just out of reach. I pushed forward, determined to uncover the truth behind the fear that had haunted me for so long. The trees loomed tall, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I could feel my breath quicken, the tension building as I pressed on. Suddenly, I came upon a small clearing I hadn't seen before, and in its center stood a wooden structure, old and dilapidated, as if it had been forgotten by time. "What is this?" I whispered, stepping closer. Reggie growled softly, his instincts kicking in as he surveyed the area. The laughter faded, replaced by a chilling silence that felt oppressive. I approached the structure, heart pounding, curiosity outweighing my fear. As I reached for the door, I hesitated. The air was thick with something unnameable, a sense of dread that clawed at my insides. "This is a mistake," I thought, but before I could turn back, the door creaked open, revealing darkness within. I stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Dust particles danced in the air, and the smell of decay filled my nostrils. Old furniture lay strewn about, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing eerily. No answer. Only silence greeted me. I felt a chill race down my spine, and I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard it again, the whispering, louder this time, wrapping around me like a shroud. "Get out," it seemed to say, an urgent warning that sent fear racing through my veins. I stumbled back, Reggie barking furiously, pulling at my leg. I needed to leave, to escape the suffocating darkness that threatened to consume me. I turned to run, but just as I reached the door, I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath against my neck that sent me into a panic. I bolted outside, Reggie following closely, the laughter echoing in the trees like a haunting melody. We ran, my heart racing as I pushed through the underbrush, the sunlight barely breaking through the canopy above. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, the laughter trailing behind us like a ghost. Finally, we broke through the tree-line, stumbling into the open space where the others had gathered. I gasped for breath, panic surging through my veins. "We have to get out of here!" I shouted, and the ranger looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "What did you see?" he asked urgently, but I couldn't find the words. All I could hear was the laughter, echoing through the trees, a sound that promised torment. As we made our way back to the truck, the whispers faded into the distance, but the fear lingered like a shadow. I could still feel the presence, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I glanced back at the woods, a part of me terrified yet fascinated by the mystery that lay within. I vowed never to return, yet I knew that the memory of that day would haunt me forever. The forest had a darkness, a malevolence that thrived on fear, and I had barely escaped its grasp. As I drove away from Maplewood Forest, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. The trees stood tall and silent, their secrets hidden within the shadows. I shuddered, realizing that sometimes it was better to leave certain mysteries unsolved. Back at home, I tried to return to normalcy, but the experience had changed me. I found myself looking over my shoulder, jumping at the slightest noise. Reggie remained close, a constant reminder of the horrors we had faced together. Yet deep within me, I felt a strange compulsion to explore the unknown, to uncover the truths hidden within the shadows. The woods had a grip on my soul, a darkness that I couldn't shake. I had survived, but the whispers lingered, echoing in the depths of my mind, reminding me that some secrets were meant to stay buried. I still remember the first time I stepped into the Johnsons' mansion. It was an autumn evening, and the sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the sprawling estate. The grand entrance greeted me with high ceilings, marble floors, and a staircase that seemed to twist into the heavens. As a 20-year-old babysitter, I had always dreamed of this kind of job, particularly because it meant I would be in a lavish home with all the amenities a college student could only fantasize about. Mrs. Johnson, with her meticulously styled hair and warm smile, welcomed me inside. "You must be Sarah," she said, extending her hand. "We're so glad you could come. The kids are really excited to have you." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile back. I had been hired to look after their two children, James, aged 8, and Jessica, aged 5, while they attended a charity gala that evening. After a quick tour of the mansion, Mrs. Johnson handed me a few instructions. "Dinner is in the kitchen, just warm it up in the oven. They're allowed to watch 1 hour of television, then it's story time. Jessica loves her bedtime stories, so make sure you give her extra cuddles before she sleeps." With a cheerful nod, I promised to take good care of them. As soon as the Johnsons left, I felt a mix of excitement and responsibility wash over me. The kids bounded into the living room, their giggles echoing in the cavernous space. "Can we watch cartoons?" James asked, his blue eyes shining with anticipation. "Sure, just for a little while," I replied, plopping down onto the plush sofa beside them. The three of us sank into the cushiony embrace of the sofa, and the vibrant colors of the animated characters danced across the screen. As I watched them, I couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth. Jessica, with her curly blonde hair and infectious laughter, was a ray of sunshine, while her older brother, James, had a protective instinct about him, glancing at me every now and then to make sure I was still engaged. After an hour, I herded them into the kitchen for dinner. I had heated up spaghetti and meatballs, and the kids devoured it. I could hear their laughter echoing through the dining room as they shared silly jokes and playful banter. It was the kind of scene I had imagined when I thought of babysitting, joyful, carefree, and filled with life. Once dinner was done, I guided them into the living room for story time. I read aloud from Jessica's favorite fairy tale, using exaggerated voices for the characters. As I turned the pages, I glanced at James, who was fighting sleep with every ounce of willpower. Finally, after a particularly exciting chapter, both children started to drift off. I tucked Jessica into her bed and kissed her forehead, promising to check on her later. I felt a wave of satisfaction as I stepped out of the room. However, that comfort began to fade into something colder as the clock ticked on. It was around 9 p.m. when the first strange noise echoed through the mansion, a faint creak, as if the house itself were settling or perhaps waking from a long slumber. I brushed it off at first, telling myself that it was just the old house's way of reminding me of its grandeur. However, as the evening wore on, the noises became more pronounced. I tried to focus on the television, but every little sound made me jump. There was a rustling in the kitchen, a faint tapping against the window, and at one point I thought I heard whispering. I glanced at the children, who were now sound asleep, their serene faces contrasting sharply with the tension building inside me. A few minutes later, Jessica stirred in her sleep and mumbled something incoherent, and suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. I felt an urge to check on her, but something deep inside me held me back. "It's just the house," I whispered to myself, attempting to quell my rising anxiety. I decided to call my friend, Emily, for some reassurance. I dialed her number, and as it rang, I felt a slight sense of relief wash over me. "Hey, what's up?" she answered cheerfully. "Just babysitting," I said, trying to sound casual. "But it's kind of creepy here. I keep hearing noises." Emily laughed lightly. "Oh, come on. It's just an old house. You're fine. It's probably just the wind or something." I wanted to believe her, but just then, a loud bang came from the direction of the kitchen. My heart dropped, and I suddenly felt very small in that vast mansion. "Hold on a sec," I said quickly, my voice trembling. I cautiously moved towards the kitchen, phone in hand, Emily still talking on the other end. "Sarah? You there?" she asked, but I didn't respond. My eyes were fixed on the window where I saw a shadowy figure peering inside, his face obscured by darkness. I could hardly breathe. It felt like my heart was about to leap out of my chest. "Sarah!" Emily's voice broke through the fog of panic. I backed away from the window slowly, my instincts screaming for me to run. "There's someone outside!" I whispered frantically into the phone, cutting her off. "Call 911!" she yelled. Without hesitation, I dialed 911, my fingers trembling against the screen. "I need help. There's someone looking into the house," I gasped. The operator's calm voice felt like a tether to reality, as she assured me that help was on the way. I hung up and grabbed a kitchen knife, gripping it tightly as I tried to steady my racing heart. Just then, I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps coming from the hallway. I felt paralyzed by fear, and I could barely hear the operator's voice in my head reminding me to stay calm. As I leaned against the wall, peeking around the corner into the dimly lit hallway, I could see the figure moving toward the living room. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to protect the children. I tiptoed back to their room, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I slowly pushed the door open, careful not to make a sound. Jessica was still asleep, but James had stirred, sitting up in bed with wide, terrified eyes. "What's wrong?" he whispered. "Shh," I hissed, placing a finger over my lips. "Stay quiet and don't move." I scanned the room, praying the intruder wouldn't come here. I felt the weight of responsibility crushing me. These were someone else's children, and I couldn't let anything happen to them. Time seemed to stretch indefinitely as I crouched in the darkness, listening intently for any signs of the intruder. My heart pounded against my ribcage like a frantic drum, and every creak of the house felt amplified, echoing in the stillness of the night. James whispered again. "What's happening?" His voice quivered, and I could see fear etched across his young face. I knew I had to keep him calm, even as my own composure was fraying at the edges. "I think someone is in the house," I whispered back. "But it's going to be okay. I'm right here with you." Just then, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the children's room. My breath hitched in my throat. There was nowhere to hide. The room was small, and the shadows cast by the moonlight offered little protection. The door creaked open slowly, and I held my breath. A tall figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from the hallway. I could see the glint of something in his hand, something that sent ice coursing through my veins. "Who's in here?" the intruder demanded, his voice low and menacing. I could hardly comprehend the danger that stood before me. "Get away from them!" I yelled, trying to summon every ounce of bravery I had. In that moment, it didn't matter that I was just a babysitter. I had to protect those kids. The man's eyes narrowed as he stepped into the room. "You're going to regret this, little girl," he sneered. I tightened my grip on the kitchen knife, but I knew it wouldn't do much against a grown man. "Stay back!" I shouted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. James clutched my arm, his small fingers trembling against my skin. "Please don't hurt us," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. The intruder took another step forward, and in that instant, something inside me snapped. I lunged toward him, brandishing the knife, desperate to protect the children. "Get away!" To my surprise, he stumbled back, caught off guard by my sudden burst of courage. "You think you can scare me with that?" he scoffed, but I could see uncertainty flickering in his eyes. That hesitation gave me just enough time. I grabbed James's hand and pulled him toward the window. We need to get out of here, I urged, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. But the intruder wasn't ready to give up. He lunged at us, and my heart raced. I swung the knife instinctively, barely grazing his arm. I didn't stop to see if I had done any damage. I just needed to get the kids to safety. With a swift movement, I shoved the window open and motioned for James to climb out first. Go! I'll follow, I urged, keeping my eyes locked on the intruder as he regained his balance and advanced toward us again. James scrambled through the window, and I pushed Jessica to follow him. Hurry! Get to the trees! I yelled, my voice breaking under the weight of fear. Just as I was about to climb through myself, I felt a hand grip my ankle, yanking me back. I screamed, a sound of pure terror that filled the air. Where do you think you're going? He growled, pulling me back into the room. I kicked wildly, trying to break free, but he had a strong hold on me. Help! I screamed, desperately hoping someone would hear me. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder and closer. The intruder's grip faltered for just a moment as he looked toward the window, and that's when I seized my chance. With a burst of adrenaline, I yanked my leg free and lunged for the knife that had fallen to the floor. The intruder turned back to me, his eyes wild with rage. You think the police can save you? Before he could make a move, I brandished the knife again, this time more confidently. Get away from me! I shouted, and he paused, uncertainty flickering across his face. Just then, the door to the children's room burst open, and 2 police officers stormed in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Put down the weapon! One of them commanded, aiming his gun at the intruder. The man hesitated, looking between me and the officers, and then he made a break for it. I watched in horror as he bolted past the officers and out the door. Stop him! I screamed, but he was already running down the hallway. The officers sprang into action, chasing after him while the other officer turned to me. Are you okay? Are the kids safe? I nodded, trembling from head to toe. They're here. I think he was trying to hurt us. The officer quickly checked on James and Jessica, ensuring they were unharmed. You did great, ma'am. Stay close to the kids. As I caught my breath, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a shaking, hollow feeling inside me. I could hear the distant sounds of the police radio and the commotion outside as they chased down the intruder. I turned to the children, who were huddled together on the floor, their faces pale. It's okay, it's over now, I said, my voice trembling as I crouched beside them. You're safe. But even as I reassured them, the gravity of what had just happened began to sink in. My heart felt heavy with the weight of fear and uncertainty, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare was far from over. The police apprehended the intruder that night, and as I stood in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, I could still hear the sirens wailing outside. My heart was pounding in my chest, echoing the chaos of what had just transpired. It was surreal, like a scene from a horror movie, and I was still trying to comprehend that it was my reality. The children were sitting on the couch, their small frames wrapped in each other's arms, eyes wide with shock. They were so brave, yet so vulnerable. I wanted to comfort them, to take away the fear that had crept into their hearts, but I was struggling to calm my own racing thoughts. Are you guys okay? I asked gently, trying to break the heavy silence that hung in the air. James looked up at me, his blue eyes filled with tears. I was scared, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Jessica nodded, sniffling, and I felt a pang of sorrow for their innocence lost. I know, sweetie. But you're safe now. The police are here to help us, I reassured them, my own voice trembling slightly as I tried to keep my composure. Just then, one of the officers returned, a kind woman with a gentle smile. You did an incredible job tonight. I want you to know that, she said, kneeling down to their level. You're very brave. I could see the children begin to relax slightly at her words, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we would be okay after all. The officer turned to me. We've apprehended the intruder. He's being taken into custody. but we'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give your statement. I nodded, feeling the exhaustion begin to seep into my bones. Of course, I replied, my voice hoarse. After what felt like hours, the Johnsons finally returned home. Mrs. Johnson rushed in, her eyes filled with concern as she took in the scene before her. What happened? Are the kids all right? I stood up, my heart pounding again as I recounted the evening's events, my voice shaking as I explained the terrifying moments we had endured. Mrs. Johnson's expression shifted from concern to horror as she listened, her hands covering her mouth in disbelief. Thank you for protecting them, she finally managed to say, her eyes brimming with tears. We are so grateful you were here. As they hugged their children tightly, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt wash over me. I had kept them safe, but at what cost? I could still hear the echo of that intruder's voice in my mind, the image of his menacing figure looming in the darkness. That night, after the Johnsons tucked their children into bed, Mrs. Johnson asked me to stay a bit longer, and I agreed. We sat in the living room, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. I can't believe this happened, she said, her voice trembling. I wish we had never left the kids alone. It's not your fault, I replied, my own voice still shaky. I thought I could handle it. We talked for a while, and I could see the fear and concern reflected in her eyes. It felt good to share my feelings, even if they were raw and painful. But as the hours wore on, I realized that no matter how much I talked about it, the fear would linger, an unwelcome guest in my mind. The next day, I went to the police station to give my statement. The officer who had been at the scene was there, and she guided me through the process, reassuring me that what I had done was incredibly brave. Most people would have frozen in fear, she said. But you acted, and that's what saved those kids. I nodded, but inside I still felt the weight of guilt. I could have done something more, I should have reacted faster. But they were safe, and that was what mattered. As the days turned into weeks, I struggled to move past that night. I found it hard to sleep, the shadows in my room reminding me of the darkness that had lurked in the Johnsons' mansion. I avoided babysitting for a while, the memories too fresh, the fear too raw. But eventually, I found the courage to return to babysitting. I took on small jobs at first, rebuilding my confidence one step at a time. I was determined to reclaim my life, to not let fear dictate my actions. Months later, I received a call from the Johnsons. They wanted to hire me again. My heart raced at the thought, but I knew I had to face it. When I arrived at the mansion, I felt a rush of memories flood back. The grandeur of the estate was still awe-inspiring, but it felt different now. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, determined to face my fears head-on. The children greeted me with open arms, their smiles lighting up the room. We missed you, Jessica exclaimed, her blonde curls bouncing as she ran to hug me. I miss you too, I said, feeling warmth spread through me. As the evening went on, the laughter and joy began to replace the haunting memories of that night. I reminded myself that I had the strength to protect them, that I could face whatever darkness came our way. That night, as I tucked the children into bed, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The shadows still lingered, but they no longer felt suffocating. I had faced my fears, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life, proving to myself that even in the darkness, there could still be light. It was one of those gloomy, rainy weekend nights when the world outside felt like a distant nightmare, the kind of evening that always nudged me into a restless state of mind. I had just turned 17, and with my parents out for the night, I found myself home alone in our split-level house. The ambience was set perfectly, rain drummed against the windows, and the wind howled eerily through the trees outside, making every creak of the house sound like an omen. I decided to distract myself by watching a horror movie, one I had been wanting to see for ages. As I settled into the couch with a bowl of popcorn, the flickering light of the television cast dancing shadows around the room. I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension, the kind that comes from immersing yourself in a story filled with terror. The first scenes of the movie played out, complete with ominous music and chilling whispers, and I couldn't help but feel the adrenaline rush that comes with being scared. I was about halfway through the film, and the tension was at its peak when I heard it, a faint sound, almost like the back door clicking shut. The house was unusually quiet, the only noise being the relentless rain. My heart raced. My parents had told me they'd be out late, so who could be at the door? I shrugged it off as my imagination, fueled by the horror movie, but the unease settled deep in my chest. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to our family group chat, asking if anyone was home. No response. I waited a moment, hoping for my parents to text back, but the silence continued to stretch. The sinking feeling in my stomach intensified. I paused the movie and strained my ears, trying to catch any hint of movement. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway downstairs. They were slow and deliberate, the kind that sends shivers down your spine. I froze, a lump forming in my throat as I glanced around the dimly lit room. My instincts kicked in. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed out another message to my family, but the words stuck in my throat. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, and quietly moved toward the staircase. Every creak of the wooden floor beneath my feet seemed deafening, but I needed to know if I was imagining things. As I reached the top of the stairs, I caught sight of the shadows moving below, pacing back and forth as if someone was deliberately circling the living room. I took a deep breath and dared to look down. My heart stopped as I saw a figure standing in the hallway. The rain outside seemed to pick up, creating a symphony of noise that drowned out everything else. I could barely make out the shape, a tall silhouette against the dim light spilling in from the living room. The figure shifted slightly, and I felt a rush of fear like I had never experienced before. Was it my imagination, or was someone truly in our house? Desperate for confirmation, I quietly descended the stairs, careful not to make a sound. The footsteps continued, dragging along the wooden floor. I quickly realized I needed to call for help, but the thought of speaking aloud terrified me. I tiptoed back to my room, the feeling of dread swelling with each step. As I reached my bedroom, I closed the door, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. I held my breath, waiting for the operator to pick up, trying to stay as quiet as possible. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice came through, calm yet urgent. I whispered into the phone. There's someone in my house. My voice was barely above a whisper, but I felt the weight of my words. I could hear the operator asking questions, but I struggled to respond, my thoughts racing. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps climbing the stairs. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. My heart raced even faster. The door to my room creaked open, and I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I glanced toward the door, and there, in the dim light, stood a figure, a man with an unsettling gaze fixed on me. I felt paralyzed, my body frozen in place as terror washed over me. The operator's voice cut through my panic, urging me to stay calm and find a safe place. I was about to respond when the figure in the doorway abruptly turned and left the room. I didn't waste any time. I hurriedly whispered to the operator about the intruder and pleaded for them to send someone quickly. I could hear the sirens approaching, the sound echoing through the rain-soaked streets outside. I felt a strange mix of relief and fear, knowing help was on the way, yet the reality of what was happening began to sink in. I had always imagined that being scared in a horror movie was just a thrill, but this was something different. This was real. Moments later, I heard the police knock on the door and announce themselves. I opened the door, my heart still racing, and led them through the house, the rain still pounding against the windows. We searched every room, every corner, but there was no sign of the intruder. I felt a deep sense of unease lingering in the air, an echo of fear that wouldn't leave me. As the officers reassured me, I glanced out the window, the rain making everything outside look distorted. That's when I saw him, a man, walking away from our house, disappearing into the shadows of the night. My heart sank. I felt as if I had just escaped something terrible. But how had he gotten in? The door was locked. The officers finished their search and reassured me that I was safe now. They advised me to stay alert and call them if I noticed anything unusual. As they left, I felt a weight settle on my chest, an unsettling reminder of the night's events. I had hoped to shake off the fear and return to my movie, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep easily that night. As the rain continued to fall, I curled up on the couch, the glow of the television now a soft light against the darkness. But even as I tried to focus on the film, all I could think about was the man I had seen, the figure standing in my doorway. My imagination ran wild, and every sound felt amplified. The night stretched on, filled with dread, as I desperately tried to convince myself that I was safe. Hours passed, but sleep never came. I remained curled on the couch, eyes glued to the flickering screen of the TV, even as the movie faded into a blur of incoherent scenes. The rain continued its relentless assault against the windows, and the wind howled like a ghost wandering the night. With every creak of the house, my heart would leap into my throat, and I'd sit up, scanning the dark corners for any sign of movement. The police had left, but the feeling of being watched lingered like a thick fog. I couldn't shake the image of the man from my mind. Who was he? What did he want? The questions gnawed at me, pulling me deeper into an anxious spiral. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I was safe now, but every shadow felt like a reminder of the danger lurking just outside my door. Finally, as dawn broke and the rain subsided, a sliver of light filtered through the curtains. I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this nightmarish experience would fade into a memory. However, as I stood up and stretched, a strange noise caught my attention, a soft tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. I froze, my heart racing once more, and cautiously walked toward the source. It was coming from the back door, the same door I had heard earlier. I held my breath, a million thoughts racing through my mind. What if it was him again? I edged closer, my instincts screaming at me to run, but curiosity held me in place. I had to know. I peeked through the glass of the door, my heart pounding. The world outside was drenched in the morning light, but it was empty. I opened the door a crack, just enough to see if anyone was there, but the only thing greeting me was the fresh smell of wet earth and the distant chirping of birds. Relieved yet still on edge, I stepped outside, looking around to make sure there was no one hiding. The yard was drenched, the grass heavy with raindrops, and the air felt clean, almost purifying. But then I noticed something, muddy footprints leading away from the door. My breath caught in my throat as I followed the prints with my eyes. They started at the back door, meandered across the porch, and headed toward the woods that bordered our backyard. My heart sank. This wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Someone had indeed been here, and they hadn't just left quietly. I quickly stepped back inside and grabbed my phone. This time, I texted my best friend, Alana, hoping she would bring some comfort. I told her everything, and to my relief, she replied almost instantly, offering to come over and keep me company. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I realized I wouldn't be alone anymore. While I waited for her, I grabbed a blanket and curled up on the couch again, watching the raindrops race each other down the window. It was comforting to think that someone would be here soon, yet the unease gnawed at me. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through social media to distract myself from the creeping anxiety. Alana arrived just as the sky turned from gray to a muted blue. She barged through the door, her vibrant energy immediately lifting my spirits. "Okay, spill it! What happened?" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with concern. As I recounted the terrifying events of the previous night, Alana listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to horror. "You're kidding, right? That sounds like something out of a movie!" she exclaimed. I nodded, the memories flooding back as I spoke. "I thought I was going to die. I didn't even see his face, but the way he looked at me." My voice trailed off, and I shivered at the recollection. "Let's not dwell on that. Let's do something fun," Alana suggested, trying to lighten the mood. We decided to watch a few movies and order pizza, hoping to distract ourselves from the haunting memories. But even as we laughed and ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After our movie marathon, Alana suggested we check the backyard, just to ease our minds. "You can't let this guy get to you. Let's just see what's out there," she said, determination gleaming in her eyes. We stepped outside, the air still crisp and cool from the rain. The footprints I had seen earlier were still visible, leading toward the woods. A surge of bravery welled up inside me, and I nodded to Alana. "Let's follow them," I said, surprising myself. As we approached the tree line, the unease returned, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The woods seemed alive, branches creaking as if whispering secrets to one another. "Are you sure about this?" Alana asked, glancing back at me, a hint of fear in her eyes. "Yeah, I need to know," I replied, steeling myself. We stepped cautiously into the woods, the muddy ground squelching beneath our feet. The trees stood tall and foreboding, casting long shadows in the fading light. We walked for what felt like an eternity, following the footprints deeper into the woods. The further we went, the more I felt the weight of the night pressing down on me. It was almost as if the trees were closing in, suffocating us with their darkness. Just as I was about to suggest we turn back, Alana halted suddenly. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes wide. I followed her gaze, my heart pounding. There, just a few feet away, was an old, dilapidated shed hidden among the trees. The door hung off its hinges, and the structure looked like it had been abandoned for years. "Do you think?" Alana started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, my stomach twisting in knots. "But we should check it out." With a deep breath, we approached the shed, the floorboards creaking under our weight. As we reached the entrance, I hesitated, a chill running through my body. But curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of rot. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, illuminating the room. What I saw made my heart stop. There, in the corner, were scattered items, a torn backpack, an old jacket, and a small notebook. My pulse quickened as I picked it up, flipping through the pages. The handwriting was messy, frantic. It was filled with notes about local houses, descriptions of families, and even sketches of my own home. "What the hell is this?" Alana gasped, peering over my shoulder. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This is someone's plan. They were watching us." Suddenly, I heard a noise from outside the shed, footsteps crunching on the leaves. My heart raced as we exchanged terrified glances. We had to get out of there. "Now!" I whispered urgently, and we bolted toward the exit. Just as we reached the door, we heard the unmistakable sound of someone calling out. "Hey! I saw you too!" We froze, adrenaline pumping through our veins. The voice was familiar, too familiar. I turned around, my breath catching in my throat as I recognized the figure standing in the doorway. It was the man from the night before, the same silhouette I had seen in my bedroom. Panic surged through me, and I pulled Alana back as he stepped inside the shed, his expression unreadable. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, and I felt a rush of dread wash over me. We had stumbled into something far darker than I could have ever imagined, and now we were trapped in it. As I backed away, I felt Alana clutching my arm, her grip tightening in fear. "Run!" she hissed, and we bolted past him, sprinting through the woods, our hearts racing with the urgency of survival. I had thought the terror of the previous night was behind me, but now, it felt like it was just beginning. The night had turned into a hunting chase, and the darkness around us grew thicker with every step we took. I had to get back to the safety of my home, but in the depths of the woods, I knew we were not alone. As we emerged from the tree line, my heart raced, and I glanced back over my shoulder. The man stood at the edge of the woods, watching us with an eerie calmness, a chilling reminder of the nightmare that was now my reality. I realized then that the haunting had only just begun, and the shadows of the night would continue to loom over us long after the rain had stopped.